Andrew Wilson from Robust Resources. Just a question about mining, but then BKPM. Generally, mining would just be my example I've had more experience with. You talked about some fantastic internal improvements within BKPM and how the wheels of progress there are spinning so much more efficiently. The coordination aspect of BKPM, do you think as the next step forward, once you've got the internal part of BKPM sorted, you could have a role in coordinating between BKPM and the Ministry of Mines and the Ministry of Forestry and the Bupatis and the governors, because it's that coordination between all the various limbs of government that seems to cause a lot of delays in the mining sector. And you've got such a good track record with improving the internal. Coordination's part of your name. Maybe that's the next step forward.
Believe me, we've tried to be coordinating a lot of things, and it's not easy. I'll tell you, the one-stop shop did not materialize until early part of last year. This was actually, a product of, or should have been a product of, the presidential decree that came out in 2007. It could not get implemented. What we did was we spent a month and a half, early part of last year, doing a roadshow to each one of the 16 ministers. And, assuming no WikiLeaks here, some of the ministers made me wait. And, I'm a ministerial level for an hour or two. And I was okay with that because I was an entrepreneur before and I was used to waiting for months, right? And that's how we were able to get the signatories from all 16. And you should be talking to some, Australian companies who have had difficulties in Indonesia, and we've been able to help them big time. And some of the American and Asian companies who've had issues. And that basically required coordination with so many different parts of the puzzle. And it's tiring, but it pays off. I think the challenge is, how do we institutionalize this, right? And I think it will get done over time because, BKPM was deemed as a super ministry in the 80s. And there was sort of like a systematic way of miniaturizing it in the last 20 years by the different technical ministries. And they succeeded in doing that. And President SBY took a view to basically elevate this back to a ministerial level, which it wasn't in the past 5-6 years or more years than that. And I think it has worked, okay? But it's not going to happen by tomorrow. Institutionalization of this capacity or the game-changing capacity, I think will take years. But I've taken the view that what we need to do is to make sure that the one-stop shop gets implemented at least in the capital city of every province. That has been done, box checked. We have implemented it in about 50 kabupaten capitals, or the regency capitals, but we've got 400 more to go. Okay, that could take 2, 3, or 4 years. And I think if we keep grinding the way we do, and we've tried to accelerate it by boiling up the provincial leaders and the Bupatis, we came up with a regional championship concept last year. We selected 7 provincial champions. And guess what it did? It pissed off the other guys who didn't get selected. And I go, you want to be selected as champion? You go do what he does. And it's happened. And guess what? Out of the total capital formation, 38% has left and gone for outside Java, as compared to only 13% the year before. That's great news for me, because the way to keep the country together is to make sure that money goes to all places, not just Java, right? And it has gone up from 13% to 38% of the total capital formation for outside Java. The end game is to make sure that we get that up to about 50 to 60% for outside Java. It's seductive for anybody to want to do business in Java because it's got the best education, port, roads, electricity, and what have you. Nobody wants to do business in Papua because it doesn't have the education, water, infrastructure like Java does. It costs anybody more. But as we keep deploying capital to outside Java, I think it will help in institutionalizing the capacity that would be required to basically do what's been done in Jakarta. So again, it's a 5-year view. It's not a 6-month view. But I think the question is, you know, if some of us get hit by a bus tonight, right, what happens next? How do we make sure that the institutionalization of such capacity, you know, takes place?
Peter Fanning, Pakita, AIBC, shifting the focus from quantity to quality. Is Australian investment in small and medium service industries important, or do you regard this investment as important to Indonesia?
Does this relate to your latest email? It's very important. Peter is a regular sender of email to me, and you know he's not a diplomat, but we always follow up on his notes. No, I think service is a big game. Is a big thing for us, but you know you've got to take into account the systemic impediment. And that boils down to the lack of education, you know, relatively, you know, compared to some of the other Asian giants, India or China. And we're not going to get to the level of service in terms of business scale until and unless we have a much bigger educated pool of laborers. And that's going to take time, okay? And what's going to drive that is basically the industrialization, which is why I'm talking to the Koreans to build as many steel mills as possible. The peripheries of those are going to involve services. I'm encouraging the Indians to build as many ports and railroads as possible, the peripheries of which are going to be beneficiary, which would include certainly service industry. And let's not forget the plumbers, because we've got to be building the polytechnics and the ITEs of the world so that we can basically facilitate those, you know, high school dropouts who want to be hairstylists in salons, or computer programmers, or people who put the nuts and bolts in factories. We don't have a crystal clear thought process on stuff like that yet. But, you know, I'm quite proactively advocating stuff like this. So I think it will come about. Look, I think competing with China is almost an impossibility, because the beauty about the Chinese is they think 100 years ahead. We can't even think of 6 months ahead. And I think the Indians, we've got some leeway to compete with. Yes, they have produced, you know, many more engineers and doctors and computer scientists and all that, but you know, they've got, you know, doing business in India is not easy. I lived in India for 3 years. Boy, it made me appreciate Indonesia big time. It made me want to join the government. I lived in Bangladesh for 2 years. It made me even appreciate India. But, you know, there are game changers in Indonesia, and I can't boast about some of the stuff we have done other than showing you the numbers. Numbers don't lie. The numbers have gone up big time. And that's a reflection of some of the stuff we have done and some of the bad things that have taken place in other countries, so that there's been rotational behavior of capital from one place to another. But as I said, if we're not proactive in making sure that we educate our people, you know, we're going to be dealing with the same kinds of issues, whether it is corruption, bureaucratic deadweight, and some of the other stuff that we've been known for. And I think we've taken a strategic view of this. There are some execution issues, okay? But the execution issues are such that I do believe in a holistic sense, I think we're capable of managing the risk out. And, shortly, soon we will go through a repricing of risks. We'll probably be rated BBB minus in a few months' time. And that's a reflection of not just our boastfulness, but that's a reflection of what we should have been known for. My wife worked for Standard & Poor's for 12 years, and I always kid with her and her colleagues. These guys at Standard & Poor's have paid too much attention to all the SPVs in New York without basically attending to the realities or the new realities of Indonesia. And we deserve to be an investment grade status long before a few months from today. Okay. All right, thank you guys.